Looking good, Jordan. I like
Got a nice view.
Jordan goes from Rikers Island to like some resort
To an actual island.
to an actual island. Where are you reporting from this week, Jordan?
From Horseshoe Bay, from
Nice.
LBJ. It's
I've
spring
heard.
break for Lenny, for a 3-year-old. So
You know what I always hated about spring break? Every year, the Brewers Association would task me with writing, the previous year in review, and they wanted it to be like a 10,000 word article.
yeah.
And it was always due in mid-March, and it was always during spring break. And I always waited till the last minute, and I'd be like, and I'd basically spend my whole spring break where my kids were out playing on the beach, and my wife was, looking up data, and then finally I told them, I was like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not getting anything out of this. They did pay me, which was every year I'd always be like, what is this check for $400 from the Brewers? Oh, right. Is it really worth the $400 to miss my child's for 10 years of my child's spring breaks? Maybe.
They were good articles. I remember, I think the last one you did, you quoted Cardi B and signed off.
What was funny is it was complete. The first few I wrote, I was like, oh, I got to be careful. And then I was like, they don't even read this before they publish it. So I would just put Easter eggs in it. Didn't matter what I wrote, nobody read it either. That was the thing. Nobody read it. It was past nobody read physical magazines anymore. Anyway, welcome everybody to Beer Net Radio, the podcast where all your dreams come true. This is our Wednesday Warehouse segment where we go over the week's news. We have our beer editors here, Jen Letts Kirk, Jordan Driggers, and Bianca Bruno. Thanks for being on, kids. Well, let's talk about the week's news. How about? Let me just start real quick on the story about the bills in Texas to sell spirit-based RTDs beyond liquor stores. We got all the facts right, but we didn't get a lot of the behind. I mean, basically, that what we wrote this morning, just to be clear, is Walmart propaganda. Okay, Walmart / Diageo propaganda. Everybody else is against those bills. When I say everybody, I mean the brewers, the distributors, all of the package store retailers. Because, keep in mind, Texas is a weird state. We have a fourth tier where package stores, when I say package stores, that's what we call liquor stores here. And they're a very strong lobby, by the way, in Texas. And, those guys, they distribute to on-premise. So if you took away their RTDs, a lot of them would go out of business, to be frank, because, High Noon's a big seller in bars. And those guys, you would just go to your beer distributor to get it if it, I don't know how it would work. But anyway, like I said, Walmart has been pushing this for 20 years. They've gotten little traction. So we'll see where the bill goes. I'm also interested in this Senate Bill 3 that, will just clamp down on D9 beverages in Texas. I'm hearing conflicting reports from my sources I've heard that it's dead. I've also heard that it's definitely going to be passed. So I don't know where, depending on who you ask. The beer wholesalers are against it, which kind of surprised me. I'm not sure why they would even take a stand. Fact of the matter remains is that the hemp-derived beverage association's on it, and they've enlisted the help of, again, the Texas package stores, who, as I said, are a pretty strong lobby here and who stand to lose quite a bit from that bill. And I know that, in fact, yesterday I even talked to an independent liquor store operator who's like, we're getting into D9. And I was like, well, what about the bill? He's like, we can't worry about that. We just need to get in it because Total Wine's eating our lunch.
Yeah.
So,
nobody, you're right. And as we know, we can't talk about it right now, but there's some big launches coming despite this bill. And, the Texas Tribune has been following this super closely, and their account was basically, sure, it might sail through the Senate, but there's little appetite in the House to pass something like this. And, it's worth $8 billion. Intox Hemp is worth like $8 billion in tax revenue in the state, 50,000 jobs, thousands of licenses. Apparently the hearing was super rowdy last week. Like, they had to clear the Senate floor or the Senate gallery, right? Because of yelling and meat. I mean, the bill, Dan Patrick, our lieutenant governor, is really, really anti-drugs. I don't think he really knows what D9 is. The guy that introduced the bill is a senator from Lubbock.
who that's not really part of Texas. Let's just be clear.
They were a dry county.
Oklahoma. And that's the Bible Belt up there. I think they're all in their own little bubble, telling themselves that we're going to, start a new war on drugs, because that's what everybody's asking for, is another war on drugs. Yeah. So, we'll see. I'm surprised it hadn't gotten out of the Senate. It's still in committee. I thought it would fly through the Senate, to be honest with you. So, anyway, enough about that. Go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, don't you feel like beer distributors can come out against it, and even if it passes, they can still be responsible for taking it to retailers?
If it passes, it'll be illegal.
No. I'm saying even if D9 stays legal here in the state, that it could end up in beer distributors' hands.
And it is.
Yeah.
It already is. I mean,
they're trying to have it both ways, basically, right, Jordan?
Yeah. I just don't know why they would be so public about it. Putting a full page ad in the Texas Tribune again. I mean, it must be because they're in coalition with someone else that asked them to do it. That's all I can think of. I can't imagine who, because I can't imagine the Texas package stores would want this. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got to call into Rick Donnelly to he's like, talk about an old school Politico that just lurks in the shadows of the Texas Capitol. He's always down in that. There's a bar underneath the Capitol called the Cloakroom. He's always smoking a cigarette down there. They don't allow you to smoke anymore. This is me in the 80s talking about him. And that's how long he's been around. So my boy Rick, we'll get him on the horn and find out what's really going on. We pushed this podcast back because we are expecting big distributor news to come, and it just has not come yet. And I'm just dying to talk about it, but we can't yet. But it'll probably hit tomorrow. So what else can we talk about, Jen?
Well, since we were talking about intoxicating hemp bills and things that are being held up because of them in the interim, Bianca covered a Georgia bill that went sideways on intoxicating hemp at the last moment. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Some in Georgia derailed a bill that actually would have reduced what's legally allowable currently, that was made by the agriculture department there. So right now they allow 10 milligram beverages. This bill, it is SB 254, would decrease that allowable amount to 5 milligrams. The bill they ended up voting on would outlaw beverages altogether. So it definitely went sideways. Because while this 5 milligram bill isn't necessarily ideal for hemp bev manufacturers, they were getting behind it because it was going to legally codify this beyond what the Department of Agriculture was allowing them to do, like through some type of memo.
And just to be clear, this is the Georgia Department of Agriculture.
Yes.
Not the,
Yeah, this is a state bill in Georgia. And so the senator who had proposed that 5 milligram legislation had called 10 milligrams a loaded gun, and said it was like drinking 4 glasses of wine, which is wildly different from what we've heard from people in the hemp beverage industry, who basically say 5 milligrams is like a glass of wine or a cocktail. So 4
just for those who aren't drinking it like I am, 5 milligrams just makes you slightly drowsy, like a little bit chill. It really doesn't do much. In fact, to me, it's not even worth drinking a 5 milligram anymore. Like I'm going 10 or I'm going home.
Okay. Dude, that depends on who you are. Remember when I took a gummy from you 2 years ago?
Which was
I was like
milligrams.
holding onto the toilet for dear life all night. And I was like, you guys saw me in real time, like get small, like in Alice in Wonderland, and start giggling. What was that? Was that 10 milligrams? I mean, it wasn't exactly.
It was 7.
Okay.
But I mean, Jen, keep in mind, you're like 200 pounds lighter than I am, and you're and you don't have a tolerance like I do. So
I had been drinking,
You're right.
That was shortly after I got hired. I think I was questioning what I was getting myself into.
I was like, I feel a little bad. We really are buttoned up around here, Bianca.
I think that was your introduction to the team. Jen having a bad trip.
Was that a Harry Styles concert?
No, that was when I came to train. Yeah.
That was just a night out at Fleming's.
Right.
Just a night out, yeah. So yeah. So anyway, I mean, there's more, right, B? Because this really puts the proverbial turd in the punch bowl for some very important things.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it did get derailed by another senator who proposed an amendment, as presumably on the floor that would be an all-out ban on THC drinks. And, he was invoking the children as legislatures have done the past year or so, and saying that they don't want any access to kids. Although I don't know that that's possible right now. I think it's already age gated in Georgia for 21 plus. But that was his argument for proposing this amendment, which passed 42-14. And so now the bill's in the Georgia House. There's a lot of moves in the state because besides Minnesota, which is kind of an outlier mecca for hemp bev, Georgia is one of the states that's been another kind of promising market that I think a lot of manufacturers has focused on, and even apparently some retailers. So there is like a bigger retailer that's looking to carry the drinks, and this could obviously impact that. So we're kind of watching to see what happens with the House on this, but definitely interesting.
Do we know if the governor is Democrat or Republican in Georgia?
I think Republican. I think a Democrat ran last year, right?
I'm just wondering if he would sign a bill. Because I know in Texas that Abbott would sign a bill banning it.
Oh, yeah.
Did you say it's Brian Kemp?
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very Republican, very red.
Yeah.
You should see some of his old campaign videos.
Oh, Lord.
He said that in one campaign video, he said he keeps his truck gassed up so he can deport illegal aliens whenever he needs to. which I guess we can segue into.
There you go. Tariffs or what?
Tariffs and this explanation for softness in scans that a lot of people are pointing to, saying there's Hispanics in hiding. And that's a big reason why Modelo's trends are negative in the latest 4 weeks, and really just for overall softness in beer. And I don't discount that. I have no reason to believe that's not the case. What I do find odd, though, is Constellation still has other Mexican imports rolling, perhaps even building, with Pacifico, Corona Familiar, Victoria. And Pacifico is a little more general market, but Victoria and Corona Familiar are huge Hispanic brands. And so it is a little strange to see those brands, gaining momentum when there's this explanation out there. So I don't know what's going on with Modelo right now. It could be Hispanics in hiding. It could be cannibalization. I'm not really sure. Do y'all have any idea? Or
my only observation would be pricing, is that people are just trading down to more affordable options, because Mich Ultra is doing great.
Yeah, Mich Ultra and Busch Light are the top two gainers still in scans, and White Claw, for whatever reason, is the second, one of the top three gainers in scans right now. And Hard Seltzer looks to be back. Mark Anthony is really performing the best in the latest frames. So it seems like it's FMBs and then Mich Ultra and some sub premium right now that are doing well in a tough stretch for beer.
And the latest week of scans looked a little bit better than previous weeks, thankfully, right?
Yeah. The latest week, beer's still not growing, but it seemed more in line with beer's historic trends of just down 1%. So that's looking better. Pricing, CPI came out yesterday, and it continues to cool off. In January, it was the lowest it's been in 3 years, and then in February, it was only up 1.5, which is lower than it was in January. So pricing continues to cool down in the new year and under this new administration. So we'll keep an eye there and see where it goes from here.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes in March and April, especially if tariffs are enacted. We'll see.
Right. And I almost feel like it's foolish to even talk about tariffs because it just goes back and forth so much. It's like we're just gonna have to wait and see what the final end game is. I would say that I would rather be in the beer business than be in the
And in the
whiskey or the wine
business?
business right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
Um, because they just, American bourbon sells a ton of product in the
Yeah.
EU, and then we also import a lot of French wine, and so it could be those guys. It could, and they're using. I've noticed that they're using alcohol as the bludgeon because nobody cares about alcohol. The real
Yeah.
action is in an aluminum and steel and cars and these giant high volume. But the alcohol plays to the public. It's
Yeah.
the political thing because nobody cares. Like if steel goes up, you don't really in your daily life unless you're buying a car, you may not notice. But if you can't get your French wine, that wakes people. So this is the alcohol is the political layer. That's the real game underneath it is the big goods.
The alcohol has the theater to it, like Boston Tea Party, and the dumping of barrels and smashing of bottles, and like
Who knew that Canadians would end up being rebels? Bro,
We pushed them. We pushed them too hard.
You push
This
a
is the
Canadian
villain
too
story.
far, they wake up. They wake up and they wake up
Yeah.
big.
Elbows up.
Those
Yeah, but
shelves
I
were
mean,
empty.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think that we can underestimate, though, the potential for tariffs to wreak havoc on beer. I mean, look at this aluminum stuff, right? The majority of our aluminum is imported mostly from Canada. And if that tariff actually goes through, it's going to drive prices up. And that's not going to be good for beer.
I'd have to imagine that the Trump administration is smart enough to not go after consumable products like beer that the general public would notice immediately as inflationary.
Yeah.
And so I would, the sheet aluminum for canning should be exempt
Yeah.
because really what they're after is industrial aluminum, and so I mean making cans isn't. But I don't know. know.
Yeah, we'll see. And then I guess the only other thing worth mentioning briefly is we reported this week, not that it even matters, because to your point, it changes daily. And the whole reprieve until April 2nd, right, under the USMCA for the Canadian and Mexican imports. And we were wondering, does beer fall under it? Well, apparently sources told us they have to make sure that they filed the proper certification in order to comply with the USMCA. But by the time all that goes through, I mean, it's going to be April 2nd anyway, right? I think they're renegotiating the USMCA, so hopefully that will have something better for beer going forward. But to your point, Harry, I mean, hopefully beer would be exempt. You don't mess with people's booze, right? But who knows? I mean, Trump has said, oh, yeah, there might be a little short-term pain, for the long-term.
Listen,
what have you? We'll see.
I mean, I don't need to give Brian any tips because the guy knows his game. Talking about Brian at the Brian Crawford at the Beer Institute, but just how the anti-hemp people always invoke the children, the beer industry needs to invoke the farmers.
Yeah.
And that's who this is going to hurt. If you lower demand for beer because of canned aluminum going up, it hurts the wheat farmers and the corn farmers and the rice farmers. How are you going to make beer? What are you going to do? I don't know. So, just bring up the farmers. You got to bring up the farmers. All right. So, one thing that I thought we should talk about, I had resisted talking about this because for a couple of reasons, but Anson Frerichs, the former Anheuser-Busch exec who left a couple of years ago, he was he was like he was like a regional VP for the Southeast, and then he was also president of AB1, the branches, and then he left to start what looks like kind of a asset management firm, I guess. But when the Dylan Mulvaney thing hit, he was all over the news, especially like Fox News and stuff. And the reason that I didn't feel like we're covering it, because it was clear he was using this to propel his career, his new career. I mean, not to throw shade, I'd do the same thing. Actually, it's the same thing that Philip Van Munching did when he left Heineken, and he wrote a book called Beer Blast, which was a big deal. It's kind of blasting the beer industry, and it launched him, in the advertising business. And I actually was in that book, not named, thankfully, but there is a scene in that book where I read it and I was like, oh shit, I was there. I remember those days. So anyway, the point is that
DE and I, getting back to the point.
writing a book bashing the beer industry is a good way to launch a career in another industry. So I see why he did it. I read the book last week, and the other reason we didn't report on it is because I felt like he was just piling on to AB, saying things that wasn't really new. I read the book, and really the only thing that I found that was novel or new about it was that he claims that he was trying to get the Black Rifle Coffee folks into the AB distribution network, kind of like a ghost deal, and then they put the kibosh on that. And what's funny about that is I was with, kind of living with the Black Rifle folks at the time, because they lived at my family's ranch that they rented for a couple of years. All their whole executive team lived out there and worked out there. And so I was pretty tight with those guys. And I actually also suggested that they go to AB, but he did it in 22 and I did it more like 18. And before they even had an RTD canned coffee, it was just bag coffee, but they were talking about going into RTD. And I said, if you do, you should call AB and, or any of the big brewers. And I remember talking with Pete Marino about it at Molson Coors. They ended up going with La Colombe, and so it doesn't always work out. So that was the only thing that was new about it. I didn't know that he went to high school with Vivek Ramaswamy, and now they're partners in this deal. So it all kind of came together that of why he was so vocal about it. And anyway, he's making the rounds right now. So it's, we're just dragging Mulvaney back into and then she's also on the news a lot. So it's just like, golly, this thing won't go away.
Yeah, I think she has a tell-all book now too.
Yeah.
Just in time for South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Maybe we'll see her tonight, Jordan.
Yeah.
Jen and Jordan are going to an event at South by Southwest that we cannot talk about. Once again, it's embargoed, but big news coming out of Austin.
Big news. That's
yes,
right.
And I was bummed I could not go to that, because that sounds like something that would be right up my alley. Anyway, so we had a couple of other stories, Jen.
Well, Jordan put together a real good story. We did a lot of research for it on Michelob Ultra Zero's fast start. They claimed that they are the year-to-date top total beer innovation, which, considering the muscle of AB, isn't totally surprising, right? So, Jay, you want to share a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, considering the mighty ABI network, it's not that surprising. I think some source told us that the 12 packs of Mich Ultra already rival Athletic's lead 6-pack in distribution, which is pretty incredible. And then also, Dry January was one of its first 2 months. So it had a really, really hot start. Diving further into AB's non-alc portfolio, I think, is where it gets interesting, though, because AB is still the number one player in non-alc. It's not Athletic. Athletic is the number one brand family, but because AB has, Busch Zero or Bud Zero and Busch NA, and then now Mich Ultra Zero and Stella Artois, they have a lot
Please do not exclude O'Doul's, the original OG of non-alc.
And you can't forget about O'Doul's. They have a lot of big brands in the space, and they're still very, very big. AB said, they have 40% of non-alc beer volume, and that's twice as much as the next competitor. It's a little smaller on dollars, but what Jen and I uncovered is, despite Mich Ultra's hot start this year, they're still losing share, and Athletic is still catching up with them. And it seems that Mich Ultra Zero might be eating into Bud Zero and Busch NA, because those brands aren't off to a great start this year. And Bud Zero is a good brand that has been doing really well, and now it's almost negative for the latest 4 weeks. So it seems there's always give and take with non-alc beer, unless you're Athletic.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, the segment's growing so fast. If you're a bigger brand, it's harder to maintain the growth, and that.
I would also say that Bud Zero got kind of an artificial head start with the World Cup when they couldn't hit the last minute and cut in Qatar or Qatar, whatever.
Cutter.
Qatar. They couldn't last minute. They're like, oh,
Right.
can't do beer, and so they rushed out the Bud Zero stuff and signage, and so it got immediate brand awareness. To me, Mick Ultra is such a natural for non-alc beer because if you're drinking Mick Ultra, you're
Basically drinking non-alc beer.
yeah, you're already already halfway there, and in a you're active and you care about your health and lifestyle and all that bullshit. So I could see why that would be a natural. What about Heineken Zero? Is it and it's Guinness?
Heineken Zero is still a huge brand. Its growth rate has fallen off, but it's still growing and it's still massive. I think a lot of brewers are in the space now where it's like, well, do we add another brand? Because it seems like you gain a lot of sales right out of the gate by just extending one of your biggest brands into a zero play. Yeah. And it has worked for every single brewer, but it seems like you always have to have another one ready to go because it's going to fall off. And as soon as you launch the next one, it's going to cut in. So Guinness Zero is not as big. It's huge overseas, and I'm sure it's just a slow build over here. But I would imagine around St. Patty's Day, it'll have a lot of marketing, a lot of play. So it's a good beer too. As they all are, really.
Yeah, a lot. Well, and just to kind of illustrate how night and day the space is from 10 years ago. So it's 2025. In 2015, I was pregnant with Billy. And I didn't tell you guys I was pregnant with Billy. The way that you knew that I was pregnant with Billy is that I ordered a Bush NA. Y'all weren't supposed to see that. But somebody saw it, knew it was going to me, and immediately knew I was pregnant. Like these days, I drink athletic. I drink more than just athletic, but I'll drink non-alc beer for the fun of it because it's good. But back then, nobody would drink non-alcoholic beer unless they really had to.
Right. It stood out. I didn't smoke it out because I just thought you really loved the taste of Bush in a beer.
Right, exactly. Like, no, everybody's like, Jen?
All right. Anything else that we're missing?
Well, I don't know if it's, it's a real small thing, but Boston is piloting these two new brands. They have this test and scale approach the last couple of years, and I think they've DQ'd basically everything they've ever tested in it. Yeah. But the latest is Just Hard Squeezed, which is a hard juice with real fruit juice and alcohol from cane sugar, 4.2%, and Sinless Spirits, 100-calorie premium RTD vodka with 0 carbs and sugar. I have to say, everybody, well, it was a small sample size, but everybody I showed the picture to, they were like, is that an NA Spirits RTD? Because it has like 000 on the can. And then you look at it, you're like, oh, in very small print, it says like premium vodka. Anyway, those are piloting. And it's just interesting seeing Boston, try to continue the innovation cycle that they've been so successful with over the last, couple decades. But it's been really hard going for them lately. And a lot of it has been fast follow stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be infuriating for a company like Boston to look at a brand like Carbless that just came out of nowhere. Just a couple in their garage came up with it, and and they're just killing it. And it's so hard for a bigger company to replicate that, and believe me, they try. All that money that they spend coming out with this boom splat spaghetti against the wall, they should just go buy Carbless.
If they don't, somebody else will. Well, yeah, I mean, Adam basically admitted that on our pod. He was like, yeah, eventually we're going to sell. Why wouldn't we? And I agree.
That's right.
And, we had an update on Carbless too. They came in at 3 million cases last year, and they're just opened Indiana with Monarch, which is, of course, Reyes and Indiana Bev. And they're looking at Tennessee, Kentucky, and Colorado for this year. So stay tuned there. Yeah. If anybody else has anything. I do have to say one thing. This is a complete 180. Harry, I finally read your story from Monday about the 7-Eleven. What a gem. Man, the turns of phrase. So good.
Wait, what?
It really was. I want the Couche-Tard.
Yeah.
Couche-Tard and 7 and I.
Oh, yeah.
Let me find some.
I was going to ask you to talk about that a little bit, Harry, if you wanted to.
Sure.
because I thought it was a great story, and I love the analogy to ABI too, because I didn't think about that, but then as soon as you started explaining it, I was like, oh wow, that is spot on.
Yeah, I think we forget that there are people involved. And when I say people, I'm not talking about the rank and file, because nobody gives a shit about them, apparently, when these mergers go down. It's mainly just the leadership. And it's humiliating if they can't get this across the finish line. It's not career ending, but it's definitely a blemish in the career. Plus, the bankers and lawyers and everybody associated want to get paid. So there's a lot of reason and motivation for them to get the deal done. And I think kind of like the Kroger Albertsons deal that failed, they look at that and they're just like, holy shit, we can't have this happen to us. So I would see them jettisoning a lot of stores out of 7-Eleven in the U.S. and Circle K in order to get the deal done. One thing that I didn't really emphasize, I just had one sentence on it, is that, yeah, this will be good for the beer industry, for wholesalers, because these independent regional C-store operators could get bigger, but private equity could also step in. And, the more I thought about it after I published it, I'm like, oh, private equity will step in. Like, there will definitely be a Hicks Muse or somebody that steps in and buys a bunch of those stores just to flip them later. I mean, that, when there's an antitrust deal, that's how those guys make money. There's an antitrust deal, you got to fire sale somebody, they have the cash, they step in, they do the thing quickly, they know how to do deals, they already have lawyers on staff, they blah, blah, blah. They do it, hold it for 6 months, and then strategically sell it to someone else, or a year or 2 years. So I hope that doesn't happen, but it will.
Yeah. I just loved some of the phraseology. I mean, of course, you had to invoke landing the helicopter on top of an Outback Steakhouse. You were like, and that has nothing. That means we must drink. And then the other one, hundreds, if not thousands. Oh, if this deal is to be done, and we cautiously predict it will, hundreds, if not thousands, of prime C-store locations will be thrown overboard with wild abandon like gold bars off the Titanic.
Also,
there was more.
Yeah, Harry, have you ever dropped a Slurpee in church?
Yes, like a Slurpee dropped in church.
What? I mean, YY has.
Of course he has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So well done there.
Thank you so much. I spent all day on that story, and I love. I also spent all day on the city story, but it's not.
Oh, that hasn't run yet. Sorry,
it hasn't run yet. Because even when I was writing
tomorrow.
it was kind of old news, and so because a lot of times, just to pull back the curtain a little bit, folks, a lot of times these stories will come in like late on Thursday, too late for us to write about it for Friday, and then other people write about it on Friday, and then by Monday it's old news. So I wanted to fill it out with some backstory that probably, let's just say 70% of our readers do not care about. People may not care how City Brewing got its start or how many times it's been bankrupt over the years, which is a lot. I mean, that brewery has a storied history. And like I said, it was the first brewery I ever visited, other than the Lone Star Brewery here when I was a kid. But my first out-of-state trip, so I have a lot of memories and history with that brewery because they own Lone Star, and my family was involved with that. So when I was a kid, but yeah, it's just it's a crazy story. Alan Bond, there's criminality involved, not with the current. Let me just be clear, not the current ownership, but there was money laundering, there was drugs and hookers. I mean that. For that little town, La Crosse, Wisconsin, that brewery has had some good stories come out of it. So stay tuned for that for the next slow news day, probably Monday.
Yeah, or tomorrow, because,
Yeah.
Unless this other deal comes through.
Right.
Which hopefully it does. So.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, I'd love to sit here and just shoot the shit with you people all day. I would. I'd love to. Because I love to talk about beer, and I love you guys. So, but we must get the rest of our work done for our readers who we care about. We want the latest. We want them to get the insights. We want them to get the, not just the news, but the news behind the news. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I want to wish everybody a good weekend. We'll be back at you next week for another Wednesday Warehouse. Goodbye.